Hey guys, what's up? It's Jack, and welcome back to the arcade. And today we are going to be talking about 10 games that were based off of movies or movie licenses that came out that were actually good. And as you guys know, throughout the course of history, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, whenever there's a video game that comes out that is based off of a movie or movie license or whatnot, chances are it's going to be bad. But these are 10 examples that are an exception to the rule. So without further ado, let's get into it because we have 10 games we're going to be talking about. And the first one on my list is X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, the movie obviously was met with mixed reception, and it didn't age very well, but Hugh Jackman, of course, always delivered. But one of the things that really caught a lot of people by surprise, including some of the reviewers that I used to watch back in the day, like a GameStop or a GameSpot, basically like everybody was basically very genuinely surprised by this game. X-Men Origins Wolverine embraced the violence and the gore and the character, of course, and did a really great job of just transferring that into a game that gave you plenty to do. It had really cool cutscenes. It did not shy away from the violence at all. And of course, Hugh Jackman reprised his role as for voicing Wolverine, which is great. Something I always appreciated. And X-Men Origins Wolverine is a game that my best friend ended up picking up, and I thought that he would regret it. And lo and behold, he certainly didn't. And I watched him and the others play through it, and none of them regret it at all. And that is why this game is on this list. Next up, we've got Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay. Now, I'm one of those people that I actually like the Chronicles of Riddick, especially the director's cut. However, I prefer Pitch Black to Chronicles of Riddick, but I actually liked Riddick as well, which is a movie that I've seen so many times because it manages to capture the essence of what Pitch Black was because of the setting and how that worked and everything. So I thought Riddick was actually really good, but when it comes to the video game, of course, that came out for the Xbox, the original Xbox, Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay was a solid first-person shooter that, yes, Vin Diesel did reprise his role as Riddick, voicing Riddick, and of course, who else could you get to voice Riddick like that? And obviously, the character being so personal to Vin obviously would make sense. And Vin Diesel being an avid gamer himself is also a good thing because it can't really ruin anything, even though it's not guaranteed, of course, if you check the course of history in terms of the actor and the game itself. It doesn't guarantee that the game's going to be good, but thankfully, the Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay did just that. You got to be Riddick, and you got to have that Riddick experience in a solid first-person shooter that everybody just loved. And they loved it even more because it literally came out of nowhere. You were expecting the game to not be so good, and then lo and behold, reviews are positive. Friends of mine that played it, that I watched them play, had good things to say about this game, and obviously the atmosphere was spot on. Butcher Bay, dude, and you were Riddick. Can't really get much better than that. So let's go on to the next one. Ghostbusters, the video game. This game came out in 2009 at the time. And I think the final Ghostbusters film at that time that came out, which was the second one, came out, I believe, in 1991 or somewhere around there. And even though the second movie was kind of met with mixed reception, the second movie actually ended up being appreciated so many years more. But people definitely missed Ghostbusters, and they were trying to get a third one to come out into development for so many years, and it just never happened for a multitude of reasons, right? And then obviously many years after that, we ended up getting Ghostbusters Afterlife, which was a good film, and then the second one, which I think was mixed, but ultimately Ghostbusters, the game, right? The video game that came out in 2009 was like literally a sequel to, it was like a third film. And they gave it the Halo Reach treatment in terms of who you played as. You didn't play as one of the original four. You were like a fifth member, right? Which makes sense. And there were so many callbacks to the first and the second film. And we're talking everything from the score of the game, the soundtrack, some of the levels. The gameplay itself was solid. And I actually thought the game was, I thought the length was perfect of the game. And they really did a great job of capturing the essence of the Ghostbusters spirit, so to speak, and putting it into a video game. And in my opinion, it was solid. I actually ended up picking it up from Walmart. I didn't have much money at the time. And Walmart, like, I think I saw it for $20. And I picked it up, and I don't regret it at all. money very well worth spent, and I played the living hell out of it until like I completed it. I had an absolute blast just grinding the game all weekend and getting through it. It was, and I'm a Ghostbusters fan, and they did the game justice with this game. I'm very, very pleased with my experience with the game. So, yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. And this one just happens to be a game that also had one of the most successful movies ever. And to this day, in my opinion, this movie is still one of the best Marvel movies to date. And that's Spider-Man 2. Even back in the day, Spider-Man 2 was that game that basically, like, fans not only love the character as much as they do today, but the freedom of being able to swing around the city as Spider-Man and use your web shooters and all these other things, and the boss fights, of course, and the classic playstyle of those games, and obviously being part of the movie and everything isn't always necessarily a bad thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tit for tat like the movie, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was kind of its own thing at the same time, and everybody seems to really like Spider-Man 2, and the Spider-Man movie games, no doubt, were popular ever since the original movie, actually, and they did a pretty good job of translating it to the game. Next up is literally a nightmare come to life. When I saw the first Alien movie, obviously the Alien is a sci-fi horror movie, right? You've got Alien Isolation over here that basically took the concept of being trapped in a large spaceship in the dark by yourself, mostly, in essence, right? With very limited things to work with. And you've got this alien that's just trying to hunt your ass down and trying to get you, right? And it even got to the point to where you had to hold your breath whenever that thing was close to you when you were hiding behind something, so that way it wouldn't hear you or sense that you were there. And that's one of the things that was actually in my nightmare. It was like, oh my gosh, I got to hold my breath. And it was so hard because it was a nightmare. And if the alien ever found me, I'd just wake up before he'd get me, right? But capturing that horror aspect and putting it into a game was a stroke of genius, and it is probably one of the best horror type of themed games, sci-fi horror, that you can have. It was like a spiritual successor to the first film, and I believe it took place before the second one. And to say they did a great job is an understatement. I've seen much footage of the playthroughs. I've seen so many reviews and everything like that. And my God, the literally taking that nightmare and that concept that I experienced personally and putting that into a game was executed so well. You can't go wrong with Alien Isolation, hands down. Of course, the next game on the list, how in the world can you talk about a game based off of a movie franchise or license or whatever without talking about GoldenEye 007, man? GoldenEye 007 had a pretty solid campaign as well. That was a legit first-person shooter for the N64. But what would make that game legendary in its status was the multiplayer, and it utilized all of the spaces for those N64 controllers, up to 4 players. You would invite 3 of your friends over, and you would basically just play multiplayer like all night long. GoldenEye 007 managed to do what Halo Combat Evolved did 3 years later, but it did it 3 years previously to that. And it was on the Nintendo, right? Of all systems. And it just goes to show you just what a big deal that game was, and how loved the first-person shooter multiplayer franchise really was. And it was actually the first game to do that to that extent that was not a PC experience. And it was on Nintendo. And that's what made GoldenEye 007 so legendary. And I want to know in the comment section, who is your favorite James Bond? Back in the day, because I grew up on Pierce Brosnan, and it was Pierce Brosnan, but then Daniel Craig kind of won me over. But I've always had respect to the source, which was Sean Connery. And of course, Roger Moore is also very well respected, and rightfully so. But for the most part, if I had to pick one, it would be Daniel Craig. So yeah, I want to know who your favorite James Bond is. All right, next up, we've got a game whose servers just recently shut down, and that is Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th took the essence, right, of what makes Friday the 13th a fun horror movie franchise, and literally put it in game form. And as a matter of fact, they also got Kane Hodder, the only man to play Jason more than once, who played him a total of 4 times. They got him to come back and to do the motion capture. And obviously, I know plenty of people saw that footage, and it was really great to see that, because we haven't had a movie since 2009, and obviously it wasn't with Kane Hodder. The last movie that was with Kane Hodder, I believe, was Jason X, and that was in 2001. So, I mean, and all these years later, like 17 years later, to see Kane Hodder back in action again, even though it was mocap, as Jason was really good, and that man could still do it. I don't care. That man could still do it. But basically, it took the concept of, there's 8 people in the lobby in Camp Crystal Lake, which was designed very well on the map, by the way. And one person in the lobby would be randomly selected to play Jason, and the player got to choose which version of Jason he or she would play, whether it was from Jason X, part 7, part 8, part 6, whatever, doesn't matter. So, and it really took the social aspect of gaming to another level, because the players that weren't Jason, had to communicate with each other to see what they could do. But at the same time, I think the player that was Jason could also communicate with these people. So it would be like it was like a hide and seek factor, but like in online form, but better. Right. So there was some strategy involved. Obviously, the different variations of Jason had their pros and cons in terms of what they could do. It's like, hey, there was always a theory by fans that Jason could teleport. And, they kind of turned that into a thing. So, yeah, Friday the 13th, definitely a love letter to Jason fans. And it was a good way to treat the Friday the 13th fans. Even though we didn't get a movie, we got a game that a lot of people really, really had a lot of fun with. So it had, I believe, 6 years of solid life. And recently they took the servers down. So it's kind of a bittersweet feeling, but I'm glad that we had it. And which Friday the 13th movie is your favorite? Let me know down in the comment section. Mine is part 6. I love part 6. All right, moving on to the next one. This game I would rent more than once from Blockbuster for the Sega Genesis. The SNES version was its own, but I rented the Sega Genesis version twice because I just preferred it. I thought it was better, but it was significantly different than the SNES version, and that is Aladdin. Aladdin, I'll never forget that I struggled with it in the beginning. And once I got to the Cave of Wonders, and then you had to kind of escape out of there because everything was falling apart. You had the lava and all that kind of stuff, and you had to get on the magic carpet to get the hell out of there. Like, I remember struggling with that quite a bit. And I don't think I beat the game when I first rented it. So when I rented it again the second time, sometime later, it was a really satisfying feeling to actually beat the game, to go from start to finish and to beat it, because back then, beating games would be celebrated. There was no guarantee that you'd beat the game, especially since you also had different difficulty levels. And of course, some games actually didn't have difficulty levels. It was just, you were stuck with this, so you had to deal with this, and you had a limited amount of continues before you had to start all over again. So beating the game was actually an accomplishment. I'm not saying that beating games today are not an accomplishment. However, back then they were celebrated. Now, it's only a matter of time, regardless of how good or bad you are, for the most part, when it comes to games. But Aladdin was definitely celebrated when you beat it. So, yeah, can't go wrong with Aladdin. Now, these two next games are not necessarily exactly the names of movies, but they are part of movie franchises, but I couldn't help but put them on this list, and for reasons you'll understand. Knights of the Old Republic, also known as KOTOR, for the Xbox, really helped solidify Xbox's versatility. Now, obviously, Halo was the biggest reason for the original Xbox success, but KOTOR was a Star Wars lore game that took place way before the movies that a lot of fans really liked. But however, there were people that loved RPGs, kind of like what Mass Effect ended up becoming. But Star Wars with KOTOR managed to do that within their own lore. And I remember seeing so many people praise that game online when they was getting reviews, and it was getting high reviews no matter who would review it, or no matter, whether it was GameSpot or whatever, it was met with praise. And a lot of my friends that I used to hang out with, they were like big RPG fans, and I would watch them play KOTOR multiple times. or in multiple sessions, because that game just ended up being a legendary, and it kind of had a cult following, and there was supposed to be a remaster that was supposed to be released, but it just never happened for whatever reason. I'm not sure, but like, it's a damn shame, because KOTOR is a legendary Star Wars game that really did help support the platform, and it was definitely a worthy entry into the Star Wars universe, and a lot of fans ate it up. KOTOR is legendary. All right, next up, and the last one on the list, Hogwarts Legacy. When you want to talk about the atmosphere of Hogwarts, these developers literally hit it out of the park when it comes to your entire surroundings of being in Hogwarts and exploring everything and doing everything that there is to do in the game. Now, granted, I'd never finished it. I need to go back and finish it, but I specifically remember it, that like, that game was so immersive. Hogwarts Legacy was so immersive. The only thing it didn't have was Quidditch, but it was so immersive. And it really did the Harry Potter saga justice. After so many years of no more Harry Potter movies, in terms of like the original 7. And the thing is, I wasn't even a Harry Potter fan until around the time when I was teaching martial arts, when I was an assistant instructor at the time. And both of my senior instructors were big Harry Potter fans. And one day there was nothing to do when I was at home just watching TV during the Christmas break. But there was a Harry Potter marathon of parts 1 and 2 while the third movie was in theaters. They were having marathons on TV. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll watch this. And lo and behold, I absolutely loved it. And then I remember calling them and texting them and saying, wow, I see why people love Harry Potter. And then after that, I became a fan. And I started paying attention to the movies when they would come out and everything. And it was really amazing. So, and to see this game handled with the amount of love that it was, I can't help but tip my hat to it. So anyway, that pretty much concludes the list. These are 10 examples that are an exception to the rule of the fact that it could be a great game, even though it was based off of a movie or a movie license. So with that being said, which one of these games stands out to you guys? Do you have any memories about these games personally? And of course, is there any what game that is not on this list did you personally love? I really like to know down in the comment section below. With that being said, thank you all for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you guys on the next one.